My name is Gracie J. Maya, and I'm 30 years old. I still remember the exact moment I realized I was being used, and it wasn't a screaming match or some dramatic betrayal. It was an offhand remark from my younger brother Kevin as I handed him cash for books, like I was a vending machine that should dispense gratitude automatically. "Why do I always have to ask you for this stuff?" he said, rolling his eyes. "If you know I need it, just give it to me." 3 years. For 3 years, I paid Kevin's college tuition, his books, and just about everything else he needed. I bought him an old pickup truck when I saw him walking to campus one day, because I couldn't stand the image of him trudging along with his backpack in the rain while my parents sat at home pretending they didn't notice. I thought he'd be grateful. Instead, he acted like I'd insulted him. "How come you get to drive a nice car and I get this junk?" he complained, staring at the dented hood like it was an embarrassment I'd personally inflicted on him. I didn't say anything in the moment, but it hurt in a way that kept spreading. Because here's the thing, I never owed Kevin anything. My parents weren't struggling. They weren't choosing between food and tuition. They just didn't want to stretch their budget to support 2 kids at once, and I was convenient. I got a good job right out of college, and I was living at home to save money, which seemed practical at first. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was smart. I told myself it was normal for a daughter to help out while she got on her feet. But over time, it became clear my parents didn't see me as someone building a future. They saw me as their personal ATM, and they resented me for not being cheerful about it. They called me cheap because I didn't waste money on things I didn't need. I didn't buy the newest gadgets. I didn't blow cash on fancy vacations. I packed my lunch. I drove my car until it actually needed to be replaced. They mocked me for it like being careful was a moral failure. And yet they had no problem asking me for hundreds, sometimes thousands, to cover Kevin's expenses like it was nothing. "You're the older sister," my mother would say, like birth order came with a billing statement. "It's your responsibility to help him out." My dad would chime in with his favorite line, the one he used like a weapon. "You live here rent-free, don't you? Don't you think it's time you gave something back?" As if the cost of shelter was supposed to equal the cost of my peace. Here was the kicker. In the same breath they'd demand money, they'd hint it was time for me to move out. "A woman your age shouldn't be living with her parents," they'd say one day, and the next day they'd ask for help with groceries, the electric bill, or fixing something around the house. It was a never-ending cycle. 3 years of being told I was lucky to live there while they treated my income like it belonged to the household. And the more I gave, the less I felt like a daughter or a sister. I felt like a bank. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It was a slow buildup of small moments that stacked until I couldn't pretend they were accidents. Kevin never thanked me for anything. Not for tuition, not for the truck, not for the clothes and gadgets I bought him when he complained he didn't fit in with his friends. If anything, he acted like it was his birthright. When he wasn't complaining about the truck being too old, he was whining about how his friends got to go on spring break trips or had the latest phones. My parents weren't any better. They praised Kevin constantly, his grades, his potential, how hard he was trying. When it came to me, it was criticism. "You're getting older. Don't you think it's time you got your own place? You work all the time, but what are you really doing with your life?" Like my sacrifices were invisible unless they were being demanded. The worst part was how they made me feel like I owed them. Every time I tried to talk about how exhausted I was, how trapped I felt. "We're family," my mother would say, like that ended the conversation. Family helps each other. But what they meant was, family helps you, and you don't complain about it. One night, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I was scrolling through Reddit, venting about my situation in a post I didn't even expect anyone to read, and I got a response that hit me like a punch. "Why do you set yourself on fire to keep them warm?" I stared at that sentence for a long time. It summed up everything I'd been feeling but couldn't say out loud. I had worked myself into the ground, paid for everything, and what did I get back? Complaints, guilt, a constant sense I wasn't doing enough. The post blew up. People told me I wasn't crazy. They pointed out how toxic my family's behavior was and that it was okay to set boundaries. For the first time, I didn't feel alone. The words boundaries and self-respect kept swirling in my head like I'd been asleep, and someone finally shook me awake. The next day, I started tracking everything I'd done for Kevin and my parents over the past 3 years. Tuition, books, clothes, food, car repairs. the pickup truck. When I added it up, the number made me physically sick. Tens of thousands of dollars poured into a family that still called me cheap. That Saturday, we had a family dinner. My mother made one of her big meals: fried chicken, mashed potatoes, the works, the kind of dinner that's supposed to feel like comfort. My stomach was in knots because I knew what I had to say. We were halfway through dinner when my dad made the comment that finally snapped the last thread. "Kevin needs new tires for the truck," he said, like he was assigning me a chore. "You should take care of that this weekend." I set my fork down. "Actually," I said, and my voice was steadier than I expected, "I'm not going to pay for that, or anything else for that matter." The table fell silent. My mother looked at me like I'd insulted her cooking. Kevin grinned, like he thought I was joking. "I'm serious," I said. "I've paid for your tuition, your books, your clothes, even that truck, and I'm done. I'm not your parent, Kevin, and I'm not Mom and Dad's backup plan." Kevin's smirk disappeared. My mom started to speak, but I cut her off before she could wrap it in guilt. "You've been telling me for years it's time for me to move out," I said. "You're getting your wish. I'm leaving." The silence was deafening. My dad tried to recover with a lecture about families sticking together, but I couldn't hear it the same way anymore. "Family sticks together," I said, looking at each of them. "Does it? Because all I've ever felt is used." I told them I already had an apartment lined up out of state. My lease started the next month. I didn't ask for permission. I didn't ask for a blessing. I just told them. My mom launched into a speech about how ungrateful I was after everything they'd done for me. My dad called me selfish. Kevin sat there with his arms folded, glaring at me like I'd betrayed him personally. "You're leaving us," my mom said, voice rising. "How could you?" "I'm not leaving anyone," I said. "I'm setting limits. I've been helping all of you for years, and it's never enough. You call me cheap because I live here, but you're happy to take my money when it suits you. I'm tired of feeling like I don't matter unless I pay for something." Kevin finally spoke up, his voice full of entitlement, like he didn't even realize how ugly it sounded. "You're such a hypocrite. You make all this money and act like you're doing me a favor. It's your duty as my sister to help me." "My duty?" I stared at him. "Kevin, I paid for your entire education. I bought you a truck so you wouldn't have to walk. I paid for things Mom and Dad should have paid for. I don't owe you anything." That set him off. He started ranting about how I thought I was better than him because I had a good job, how I should have bought him a decent car if I was going to buy one at all. My dad jumped in, telling me I shouldn't talk to Kevin like that. That's when I turned on him. "You've been enabling this attitude for years," I said. "You made me feel like I had to step in because you didn't want to. Well, guess what? I'm done playing that role." I got up from the table, walked to my room, and closed the door. My mom was crying. My dad was seething. Kevin was muttering under his breath. I didn't care. I started packing. And for the first time in years, I slept like someone who finally stopped paying for other people's comfort with her own life. The days after that dinner felt like living inside a house where every door slammed a second too hard. My parents barely spoke to me unless it was to test whether I'd come to my senses. When they did talk, it was never about what I'd said at the table. It was about consequences they didn't like. Kevin acted as if I didn't exist, stomping around the house, slamming doors, blasting music whenever I was nearby. It was childish, but it was also familiar. This was how he reacted when he didn't get what he wanted, only this time there was no one smoothing things over for him. I ignored it all. I spent my evenings packing, folding clothes into boxes, sorting through things I'd accumulated while quietly supporting everyone else's lives. Every item I packed felt symbolic. A jacket I bought myself, but rarely wore because I was always saving. Books I'd never had time to read. Small reminders of how much of myself I'd postponed. Finalizing the details of my move felt surreal but grounding. I'd found a job in another state, a smaller city with a lower cost of living and a slower pace. The offer wasn't flashy, but it was solid, and for the first time in years, it felt like something that was just for me. One night, my mother cornered me in the kitchen while I was washing dishes. Her voice was low, urgent, the way it gets when she thinks emotion will override logic. "Are you really going to leave us like this?" she asked. "What are we supposed to do without your help?" I dried my hands slowly and turned to face her. "You'll be fine," I said. "You managed before I started paying for everything, and you'll manage again. I'm not in charge of this family's finances." She shook her head like I was being unreasonable. "It's not about money," she said. "It's about family. You're turning your back on us." I didn't argue. I'd learned there was no point. They didn't want to hear my reasons. They just wanted me to keep my place. Moving day came faster than I expected. I packed my car early in the morning, the sky still gray, the house quiet in that uneasy way it gets before a storm. My mom stood in the doorway crying, my dad barely looked at me, and Kevin didn't even come out of his room. I didn't give a speech. I didn't make promises. I hugged my mother, nodded at my father, and drove away. The farther I got from that house, the lighter my chest felt. For the first time in years, I could breathe without bracing myself. My new apartment wasn't fancy. A one-bedroom with mismatched thrift store furniture and a view of a parking lot. But it was mine. No one commenting on my spending, no one demanding receipts, no one treating my paycheck like a group project. The first week was strange. I woke up expecting my mom to knock on my door or Kevin to barge in asking for money. My phone stayed silent. At first, that silence felt like rejection. I kept thinking, they'll call soon, they just need time. Then I realized something uncomfortable. They didn't need me. They needed my money. Without that, I was suddenly irrelevant. Instead of spiraling, I threw myself into my new life. My job was steady, the hours reasonable. I joined a local hiking group and spent weekends exploring trails, something I'd never had energy for before. I started painting again, cooking meals just because I wanted to, reading at night without guilt. One evening, I logged back onto Reddit and posted an update about leaving, setting boundaries, and starting over. The response floored me. Hundreds of people congratulated me, shared their own stories, reminded me that boundaries aren't selfish, they're necessary. One comment stuck with me. You don't owe anyone your peace. Still, I thought about my family. I wondered how they were managing without me. Did Kevin finally get a job? Did my parents regret the way they treated me, or were they just angry I wasn't there to bail them out? Doubt crept in sometimes, late at night when everything was quiet. But every time I felt guilt rising, I remembered the years of thankless sacrifice, the constant demands, the way they dismissed me the moment I stopped paying. 3 months after I moved, just as I was starting to feel settled, I got an email from Kevin. I almost deleted it without reading. Curiosity won. The email was short, nothing like his usual tone. He didn't ask for money. He didn't complain. He said he wanted to talk. I know I've been a jerk, he wrote. I think I finally understand why you left. I just want to explain some things. Can we talk? My heart thudded. Was this real or just another way to pull me back in? Against my better judgment, I replied. I told him I wasn't ready to meet in person, but I was willing to listen. His response came the next day, and it was the closest thing to self-awareness I'd ever seen from him. Kevin's reply came the next morning, long enough that I knew he hadn't fired it off in a burst of emotion. I read it slowly, twice, then a third time, because the tone alone felt unfamiliar. He started by admitting he'd been furious when I left. Not sad, not worried, furious. He said it felt like abandonment, like I'd pulled the floor out from under him without warning. I almost laughed at that part, because for 3 years I'd been holding him up while he kicked at the walls and complained about the view. But then the email shifted. After you left, he wrote, things changed fast. My parents, he said, had turned to him the way they'd always turned to me. They wanted him to get a part-time job to help with the bills, even though he was still in school. They asked him to cover groceries, car insurance, utilities. They reminded him how lucky he was to live at home. They told him it was his responsibility now. The phrasing made my stomach tighten because it was word for word what they'd said to me for years. I guess I didn't realize how much they leaned on you until they started leaning on me, he wrote. I used to think you had it easy because you had a good job. Now I see how much pressure that actually was at my age. He described juggling classes and work, how exhausted he felt, how every conversation with our parents somehow turned into a reminder of what he owed them. He admitted he'd lashed out at me because it was easier than admitting he'd benefited from a system that hurt me. The closest thing to an apology came near the end. I'm sorry I treated you like it was your duty, he wrote. I took everything you did for granted. I sat there staring at the screen, my chest tight with a feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't relief. It was recognition. For the first time, Kevin was seeing the same picture I'd been staring at alone. Then came the part that surprised me most. I don't think I can stay here either, he wrote. I've been saving up, and as soon as I can, I'm leaving. I don't want this to be my life. He ended the email by thanking me, for the tuition, for the truck, for the years of support he'd treated like a given. I didn't appreciate it then, he admitted, but I do now. I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the words settle. Hope is a dangerous thing when you've spent years being disappointed, but I felt a cautious flicker of it anyway. Not hope that everything would magically be fixed, but hope that something had finally shifted. I didn't rush to respond. I waited a day, then wrote back carefully. I told him I appreciated the honesty, that I wasn't ready to step back into the role I'd left, and that any relationship going forward would have to look very different. I didn't promise forgiveness. I didn't promise help. I promised clarity. A week later, a physical letter arrived in my mailbox. Not an email, not a text, a handwritten letter from my mother. The envelope alone made my hands shake because it carried so much history. I opened it slowly. The tone was different right away. Gone were the guilt-laced phrases and veiled accusations. Instead, she wrote about regret. She admitted that she and my father had leaned on me too heavily, taken my contributions for granted, and treated my generosity like an entitlement. She acknowledged that their finances hadn't been as stable as they'd pretended, and that pride had kept them from adjusting their lifestyle when my father's hours were cut years ago. It wasn't fair to put this on you, she wrote. We should have been honest. She said they missed me. Not just the help I provided, but me. She said watching Kevin's struggle had forced them to reevaluate their behavior in a way nothing else had. I read the letter twice, then folded it and set it aside. I wanted to believe her. Part of me did. Another part remembered how easily remorse can turn into pressure when desperation returns. A week after the letter, my father called. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something told me to answer. He sounded awkward, fumbling with his words like he didn't know which version of himself to use. I haven't been a good father, he said finally. I pushed too hard, took too much, and didn't say thank you enough. It was the first time he'd spoken to me without authority in his voice. We talked for nearly an hour. He didn't defend himself. He didn't minimize what happened. He just listened. I didn't rush to forgive. Trust doesn't rebuild on demand. But after a lot of thought, I decided to extend an olive branch without reopening the door to the old dynamic. I sent them $5,000, not as a bailout, not as a promise, as a one-time gesture of good faith. I made it clear this wasn't ongoing, not a return to being the family solution. I want to help you get back on your feet, I told them, but I have to keep my boundaries. To my surprise, they accepted it without protest. My mother sent a thank you card. My father called again, just to ask how I was doing. Kevin followed through on his plan a few months later and moved out, supporting himself for the first time. We've spoken occasionally since, slowly, cautiously, rebuilding something that looks more like mutual respect than obligation. I don't regret leaving. It was the wake-up call my family needed, and the one I needed even more. I still have boundaries. I still say no when something feels wrong. But for the first time in years, I don't feel like the family's ATM. I feel like a person whose presence matters, even when her wallet stays closed.